Hello, everybody. It is time for the Jauntlet Mid Season Report. Welcome, one and all, to your co commissioner's solo effort to look back at the first 7 weeks of the season, talk about what's going on behind the scenes, dig in a little deeper, talk about those trends, see who's got too much going on, and see who doesn't got shit going on, if you know what I mean. Let's get into it. First of all, here are our high scorers on a consistent basis for the first 7 games of the season. We'll see that Dan Dan's Daddy Issues, aka Team JoJo, and Crystal's Chiefs are both putting up over a buck 60 a week on average. This is not translating to a good wins and loss record for Crystal's Chiefs, but it is doing wonders for how Team JoJo is able to move up the leaderboard. Followed in third place by Royal Hawaiians, then Brazilian Sensation, who are just about neck and neck. Followed by Thanos Snap, GT Special, and myself, not pictured, putting up over 140 a week. Things to talk about here. One, GT Special, they're clearly in the top half of the league in points per week. So they're probably getting those wins on the old points every week, but they're really hitting tough matchups week to week on the heads up schedule. On the flip side of things, Tommy and the Beaches are two leaders in the league. They're getting lucky with the schedule because if you look at where they are on points, they're sitting down there in the 10 and 11 hole week to week, averaging, less than 2/3 of the league in points per week. But when they have those head to head matchups, they're pulling them out and they're winning. So their record reflects they're doing better head to head than they are with points per week. Just to remind everybody of our biggest beat on the season, this is the spanking that Daddy and Mommy gave on Davin, a 78-point spread, I think that is. Just a disgusting display. As you can see from Davin's record, he's really just not in a position to hurt anybody, but he is in a real bad position to get hurt. And this is when we first knew there was trouble. Our thinnest wins of the year so far, we've had two really close games, about a 2-point differential. Um, uh, Breaking Lad got their heart broken by Carlos, and Big Kahuna actually gave Davin likely his one and only bright smile of the season, um, with 113 points. Being able to win in this league is really tough, and then to do it against the oldest member of the league feels like elder abuse on some level, but considering what his parents did to him, it makes sense that he would turn around and seek revenge on the favorite's um, patriarchal figure. So it is what it is. Memories, huh, guys? Those were good days when you were sweating out whether you were going to win, um, not even breaking 115 points, you losers. Speaking of losers, so here's some of our losing points losers of the season so far. You'll see that both Davin and Commissioner Dandan have bigger pieces of the pie, which means they've each been the lucky recipient of having to pay up $10 twice each this season, along with Jersey Mike, Tommy, and Shane. I know, right? You look at Jersey Mike's record and you're like, how has he not just filled this whole circle in with his name? But he's only had to pay up one time, which is, I think, insanely lucky. On the flip side, Carlos is our two-time winner, the only person to go, and he's done it back to back. He's claiming a three-peat is on the way, which, I don't know that that's going to hold water, but with the way that Dart and Scatty Boo are playing, who the fuck knows? What's funny about this, too, is that you can see we have some of the same folks on both sides of things here. Big bit more spread on the high points. Somebody's name is actually in white there that like I can't even read it, but I think that might be Uncle Dave, but who knows? Anyway, what's funny here is that Davin's been on both sides of the coin, and so has Shane, and so has Royal Hawaiians. So for those guys, it's really like roller coaster season. For a lot of us, though, we're just happy to not wind up on either side of these lists, right? Actually, wait, maybe that was me. Did I win high points? I doubt it. I don't remember. Maybe I did. Anyway, moving on. So, Shane and Big Dan both just in the shit with injuries. Shane got 5 guys on injured reserve. Big Dan's got 4. That's going to explain the next slide, which is why these guys are just spendthrifts on the ad drops. I mean, Shane is almost blown through 3/4 of his allotment for the year. We all get $200. He's got 146 gallon. Big Dan's like trailing behind, Captain Vegas. He's fresh from the Parks Casino, feeling flush, overspending for tight ends every week, so he's already blown through half his money. And then, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. There's Royal Hawaiian coming up right behind his daddy with like, you think you got money here, I can get money too, and I'm going to buy stuff too, and yada, yada, yada. It's halfway through the season. The rest of us clowns, we've spent less than half our money, which makes sense. Manage your money properly. Don't overspend. Don't put in big spends. Be smart. Wait for that first day of the waiver wire, and then go out and get a guy for $1 or $2. You don't need to spend $8 on a kicker on Monday. You can get a kicker on Thursday for $2 or $1. Goes hand in hand here. The biggest ad droppers, Big Dan and Shane, 21-22. And then, of course, no surprise, there's Tommy, who's, in third place. Maybe by the end of the season will be in first place because he likes to keep a few empty roster spots on his bench for some reason. So I think if he had been filling his whole roster up with positions, he'd probably be at 27 ad drops. But he's slow and steady. But I think by the end of the year, it'd be funny to see if Tommy's number 1 in this one. All right, let's go into some trade analysis. We've had some distance. We have some time. I'm going to start back on our first trade of the season. After week 2, Davin said, Jordan Mason and DK Metcalf, get off my team. I'm going to be dominant this year. I don't need you. Let me make a bold move. He approaches Big Kahuna for T. Higgins. And when you look at the numbers here, Jordan Mason, modest first 2 weeks, that makes kind of sense. Like, well, he's, after 2 weeks, I would have probably said 8.5, 5.8. No, man, this guy's going to stink. DK Metcalf, on the other hand, 12.3 and 11 first 2 weeks. I don't really know why you would bail. But when you look at both of them since this trade happened, 15.2 per game for Mason and 16.82 for Metcalf. Yikes. On the other hand, T. Higgins, 6.3, 15.6 first 2 weeks. Burrow gets hurt. I can see why Big Dan would want to unload him, not knowing that Flacco would wind up a month later being at the helm and seemingly being able to just throw the ball anywhere near Higgins or Chase, and those guys will catch it. So I think it's pretty obvious that even though T. Higgins is probably going to increase his average of 11.42 a little bit under the Flacco era, the swing here is like Big Dan got 32 points, a week, and only gave up a guy who's getting 11.42. So unfortunately, Davin, another opportunity for you to be classified as a loser in this league. Sorry, bud. Nothing personal. Moving on to our next loser. After week 4, yours truly, I decided to do a sell high move on baby brother Dan. RJ Harvey just wasn't doing it for me out there in Denver. He put up 20 points almost in week 4, and I had listened for 4 weeks about how my brother has this weird animosity towards height challenged quarterbacks in the NFL, namely Kyler Murray and the beloved Panthers quarterback, Bryce Young. And it got into my head. So I said, what do you think about giving me McMillan? You know, at that point, McMillan was averaging 11.7 points per game, and Dan wasn't happy with that. So he says, no, sure. And if you look at the numbers here, since I gave him Harvey's in the shitter. 6.5, 7.2 in the 3 weeks since the trade. Meanwhile, I know it's not flashy, but McMillan has increased almost a full point per game. It's skewed heavily by doing really well in one game of the three, and I do think it's too early to tell, but I think longer term, McMillan is a true number one on a team that, you know, is terrible, but he is the number one option there. And Harvey is a clear backup and a rookie, and this has not been the year for rookie running backs unless their name is Judkins, and that might not even last, to be honest, for the Browns. So unfortunately, baby bro, you're the loser in this one. All right, next up is the biggest one. This one is like trying to find the Golden State Killer, man. I got a whole whiteboard in my bedroom. I got fucking string and push pins trying to analyze what the hell was this trade and who the hell wins. The two young bucks in the league, Tommy and Jersey Mike, got together and concocted this thing back in early October. And if I'm following, you know, Jahmyr Gibbs was averaging about 20 points a game after their first 4 games. And Jersey Mike's wisely decided, all right, I need to use this guy for some trade bait. My team stinks. He knew at that point his team sucked. First 4 games, he probably maybe scraped out 1 win in that time period. I can't recall, but yeah, you got to make a move. So you look at the other side of this, and Etienne at that point was averaging 17.5 points. Williams was averaging 19.5 points. Either one of those guys straight up for Gibbs to me is like, okay, you know, go Williams for Gibbs and take your chances, fellas. The fact that he had Etienne and Williams involved, it's like, well, that's a no-brainer if you're Tommy. Like, I mean, if you're Jersey Mike, sorry, to say I'm getting 2 guys for the price of 1, great. Seemed a little excessive, but okay. Then, of course, Tommy adds Flowers into the mix, which to me is just defies logic. You know, that guy was averaging 15.42 points per game after the first 4, so he was like in the top of wide receivers after 4 weeks. What are you doing? Why are you giving up 52 points to get a guy that only scores 20 points a week on average? I couldn't see the logic. I thought this was easily a no-brainer for Jersey Mike. You get 3 for 1. Huge upgrade. Let's go. Yes, I know Jackson got hurt, and that probably spelled fear. And, of course, Jacksonville doesn't look great. So maybe that was the logic Tommy had going on. Is like, oh, Jackson's done. This team's toast. I don't know. It seems crazy to me. You're talking about 3 starters for 1 starter, and Gibbs works in a backfield that has also Montgomery. I don't know. On paper, I was like, this is just easily Jersey Mike's is the winner. However, since that trade, Flowers has dropped down to 12 points per game in the last 3 weeks. Etienne has dropped down to 8.26. And Williams is holding his own still at 18.7, but again, that's, you know, skewed a little bit by a big game. But at the end of the day, that 52 points per week that Jersey Mike's was expecting is really only sort of panned out to be 38 points per week. Meanwhile, Gibbs has actually increased his output to over 21.5 points per week. So, you know, in a normal world, I probably would have said this is too early to tell, or I would have stuck with my guns and said, you know, Tommy just gave up the whole fucking house to get Jahmyr Gibbs. But then I go and look at the win-loss records, and Tommy's up there with 10 wins, and Jersey Mike's is scraping the 14th hole and looking for a way out of this league. So I think at the end of the day, you have to say this one worked out for Tommy, and Jersey Mike's is the loser. It pains me to say that, but The final deep dive I'm going to put into our trade analysis is this pretty blockbuster trade that JoJo cooked up with Shane. McCaffrey, 5 weeks in, was doing about 25 points a game. And I think JoJo kind of decided I got to get some big balls here. C-Mac is staying healthy, but who knows if that's going to hold true. He's putting up 25 points a game, so he's going, well, I already have Prescott, and Prescott is just slinging the rock. He also had Pickens and was benefiting from Lamb being out, but maneuvering to get Lamb to either wind up with Lamb and Pickens and Prescott, which is not a bad move, and also get 20 points a week from Cook. This one was very, very much like looking like a bit of a steal. Like, considering that T. Shane's has kind of already moved on from C-Mac and traded him away. I don't know how he feels about the trade, Shane, but and other things have happened too. Like Pickens is no longer on JoJo's team, but on the surface, you can't blame this guy for saying, "Ride the hot hand, Prescott. Give me Lamb." Lamb was hurt. He only did 20 points a week and then got hurt. But you saw what happened with Lamb back first game. Pickens kind of fell right back into the 2 spot, and Lamb fell right back in the groove with Prescott. And they're going to be down in a lot of games because their defense is trash for some reason that I can't put my finger on. And I think, long term, Cook and Lamb are going to really be good additions to JoJo's, and we see it. They're moving up in the leaderboard. Finally, got 3 trades here that happened recently. They're probably a little too soon to tell. I'll talk a little bit about them. Just, I made a little offload that I think on the surface is very easily benefiting Shane more than me. Mims is a true 2 out there for the Broncos. I really just was scared about Kittle. He'd been gone for a while, and coming back from an injury like that where he like totally ripped a hamstring, as we saw this past week, didn't do great. I'm nervous. So at the time, I was desperate to make sure that if I do rock Kittle, I want Tongs on my bench just to be able to slide him in. I've also made some other moves where I don't feel as this is as important anymore. I have Pitts, I have Fannin. Those guys are serviceable. So I have 3 with Kittle. I think I've already dropped Tongs because I didn't need to hold a 4th. But really, this was a protection move at the point where I was thinking I might want some protection for Kittle before I felt like Fannin is turning into the number 1 at the Browns. And Pitts is having a pretty decent season for Pitts. So I'll give this one to Shane. I don't think that's going to change because Tongs is a backup and Mims is a true 2. And then we have 2 blockbuster trades that recently happened earlier this week. So, very, very soon to tell. But let's talk about it. I talk a lot of shit about Barkley's regression. I talked about it at the draft. I talk about it every week. It's clear that nobody wanted to listen to me. Everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid up there. But it's a very hard act to follow. But I do think there's upside that Barkley will improve and maybe get back in the top 10 before the season's over. But realistically, this was less about me wanting Barkley and more about the fact that I have Ashton Jeanty as my true number 1 running back. The Raiders are abysmal. The team's terrible across the board. Poor coaching, no line. It's just trash. And so I needed to get distance from worrying about Genty's health status week to week. And with Barkley, I feel like even if he gets in there and only gets 50 yards and a couple, maybe a touchdown every other week, it's more consistent for me, and I'll just work around it. Subsequently, I also wanted to get rid of Wentz. I'm tired of it. After I just watched him shit the bed all over the Eagles. Jefferson's still going to get his points no matter who's throwing, but they don't want to put McCarthy back in. That's making me nervous. I only drafted the Vikings quarterback because I wanted to see McCarthy. I felt like he was ready. The injury really kind of threw things out. So, Wentz for Stroud is like a wash, right? These are 2 low 20s, mid 20s ranked quarterbacks in the league. Doesn't really hurt either of us. We're just, changing guys that are interchangeable. And I do think maybe Jefferson and Barkley are both probably guys who are playing outside the top 10 in their position to have a chance to get back into the top 10. I don't know. I think this is a pretty even trade, and I think it'll probably wind up being at the end of the season like null. The only thing that's going to benefit for me is that we have a lot of depth at flex and wide receiver and not a lot of wiggle room with running back. Have to start a running back. So for me, I'm hoping that Barkley fills that for me and I don't have to worry about that the rest of the year. Finally, JoJo had another big blockbuster with T. Shanes. So, I think if you're tracking, me and T. Shanes and Jordan have been really the big traders in this league so far for the season. This one, I'm sure JoJo is just doing the same thing, like Dan, dropping Geno and Trey Tucker. It's time to bail on Bowers. This kind of injury that's lingering, it feels like this is going to be a whole season. Pickens, his value slipped right away once Lamb came back, which ironically I told him when he tried to load me with this trade. He gave me a Pickens Dowdle trade that I turned down for the simple fact that I said when Lamb gets back, Pickens' value will drop tremendously and that Chuba and Dowdle are in a fucking split backfield, and you can pretend that that's not the case, but I'm 53 and I've lived a life and I live for football, so sell that bullshit somewhere else. Now that said, Shane has to make a move here. He did make a move to acquire C-Mac. I'm sure he's got a little bit of sour grapes. So to get 3 for 1 is an upswing from what he did the first time. And if Bowers does come back and plays and is healthy, he is going to be the number one guy there. He's going to get 12 targets a game, and he was a monster last year. So huge upside there. Pickens, absolutely, as a number 2, is still a number 2 on probably the best passing offense in the NFL. So, that's not a bad number 2 to have. It's not like having a number 2 on the Jets or, the Bears or something like that. So I think there's plenty of value in Pickens, even though, it's a Cowboys player and we all hate that. And I think that was a good move by JoJo not to go so all in. Pickens, Lamb, and Prescott is a little sketchy if shit starts to fall apart there in Dallas. And then, although I did say it's a split backfield, Dowdle is younger and has less of a health issue that Chuba does. And so Chuba getting hurt again wouldn't shock me. And there might be a little bit of rock the hot hand maneuvering with that team anyway. So I think it'll be up and down until Hubbard is hurt. And then that will benefit Shane. So I think at the end of the day, this is probably a good trade for both sides is how I feel about it, but it is too soon to tell. All right, everybody, that's my mid-season check-in. Enjoy the rest of your day.